Welcome to Uniquely Female Troubles. My name is Leslie Wells. Last week I made a video about the horrible things that the cult leader William Branham said about women. The cult leader that was the cult I was a part of for 28 years, which was the End Time Message. And the leader was named William Branham, and he said a lot of really awful things about women. He said that women were lower than hogs and dogs, that we were the lowest creation, that we were the lowest being of anything on earth compared to all the animals and everyone else. And he also said that he struggled against the urge to kill women, but that we were not worth the bullet that it would take to kill us. So those are some of the things he said about women. And I sat there and I listened to that. And yesterday last time I made a video about him saying those things. And what I wanted to include in the video is that how I felt listening to him say those things. But you know what? I couldn't, because I don't remember having any feelings about that. I don't remember feeling like he was right. I don't remember feeling like he was wrong. I don't remember feeling angry or hurt or anything. And so I really couldn't talk about that in that video. But since then, I've been thinking about it a lot. And I know why I pretty much didn't have any feelings about that. And that is because of a thing called cognitive dissonance. And I want to talk about cognitive dissonance in this video and about some of the mind control techniques that cults actually use. And cognitive dissonance is it's this thing that we do, our minds do. And if we believe something and then we run into information, a piece of information that contradicts what we believe, but we also believe that second thing of information, then what do? We're believing two contradictory things at the same time, and that is something our minds do not want to do. Our minds want everything to stay consistent with each other. And so if we believe one thing and then we run into a piece of information that contradicts that, then we could drop the first belief and start believing the second belief. That would be one way to keep things consistent, because we still only believe one thing about this subject. But if we don't want to drop the first belief because it's very important to us, then what happens? What happens is sometimes we will tweak things, especially with the new belief. We will tweak things until they no longer contradict each other. And sometimes it takes a lot more than tweaking. Sometimes we will twist the second belief and we'll turn it into a pretzel that's about to break. We twist it around so much until it eventually does not contradict the first belief. We can still hold both beliefs, but now they don't contradict each other anymore. And it's very similar to a physical thing that happens, a physical process called homeostasis. And what homeostasis means is that in every living organism, our bodies try to maintain a consistent internal environment. And when anything comes along that tries to change that internal environment, our body will react to try to stop it from changing it. And a really good example of homeostasis in warm-blooded mammals, including humans, is temperature. And we don't have a very big range of temperatures that our inside can be. A normal temperature is 98.6. You can go a little bit above that or a little bit below that, but if you go very far above it or below that, that gets very dangerous. And high fevers can cause seizures. High fevers can even kill people. Hypothermia can also kill people if you get too cold. So what happens, what our body does is, if we get too hot, we sweat. And the process of, once that moisture gets outside on the outside of our skin, it begins to evaporate. And that evaporation cools us off. And so that lowers our body temperature. That's the response of the body to maintain homeostasis. If we get too cold, then we'll start to shiver and get goosebumps. And those two things actually raise the temperature of our bodies. That's why that happens when we get cold. And that is a way of maintaining the consistent environment, the environment that's the optimum environment for our bodies. And so cognitive dissonance is something very similar to that, because just like our bodies want our internal environment to remain the same, our minds want to not try to believe things that contradict what we already believe. And that's something that's a real thing. And one thing that happens, if one belief, say your original belief, is very, very important to you. Like, say, for instance, you believe that a certain man is a prophet of God, and you've dedicated your entire life, or a lot of your entire life, to following this man. You base your entire identity, how you live, everything about yourself as much as possible based on this man's teachings. And then you come across a piece of information that makes it sound like he's not a good person. Like, for instance, that he wants to kill women, or that he says women are lower than hogs and dogs. What do you do? Well, that's a very big case of cognitive dissonance. And what then? And there are a lot of ways to deal with cognitive dissonance. Now, I can't think of a single way that I could twist that around and make it where William Branham saying that he wants to kill women does not contradict the idea that William Branham is a good person and that William Branham is a prophet of God. So what do I do? There are quite a few different things that the mind can do to solve this problem. And before we get to that, there's a really common thing that cognitive dissonance comes up in, and that is when we break our own moral code. So most of us believe we're good people. I mean, probably not many of us think we deserve sainthood the way the Catholic Church makes certain people saints. And most people might not necessarily believe that, but we believe in general we're pretty good people. So, but we have a moral code. And if we do something that violates our own moral code, how do we continue believing that we're good people? That is a dilemma. And what often happens in that case is we justify it. That is a way to deal with cognitive dissonance, is we justify it. So for instance, say I shoplifted, and I said, well, and then to justify it in my mind, instead of saying like, wow, I'm a shoplifter, I'm not a good person, I'm a bad person, then I could say, well, I stole some food from that store that has thousands of locations all over the world and makes billions of dollars every year. Big deal. Why should they have all that money and I don't even have enough money to buy food? It's no big deal. It's nothing. That's not really wrong. Or another way could be if I sold something for someone, but like a long time ago, I remembered that they took something of mine that didn't belong to them. I could say, well, she stole from me a long time ago, so now I'm just getting back what I deserve. And you'll come up with a way, or I'll come up with a way, to make it where what I did wasn't that wrong, or wasn't wrong at all. I justify it to the point that I don't even consider it a wrong thing anymore. That is a case of cognitive dissonance, and that's a way of solving it. But when you're in a cult and you believe this stuff, and then the cult leader says or does something that you absolutely don't agree with and that you think is wrong, you have cognitive dissonance. The person that came up with the term cognitive dissonance is named Leon Festinger. And he was a social psychologist, and he coined this term and came up with this idea of how the mind deals with contradictory beliefs. And he wrote a book in 1950. It was published in 1956 called When Prophecy Fails. It's a very interesting book. And then in 1957, he wrote a book called A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance. And I've read the first book. I haven't read the second one, and it is fascinating. And I'll probably make a video all about what that book is about one day. But one And one way we have of kind of minimizing cognitive dissonance is called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias just means that when you run into information, you interpret it or understand it in your own mind in a way that it does not contradict what you already believe. So if you already believe a certain thing and then something kind of seems like it's the opposite of that, you figure out a way to understand it so it doesn't contradict what you already believe. So it confirms what you already believe. Another way that we do that is called selective exposure. Selective exposure is what nowadays people call staying in your bubble. And when you're in a cult, you are in a bubble. You're in the bubble of bubbles. And that just means that, for instance, if the only kind of news you listen to is Fox News and other channels that are similar to Fox, excuse me, I'm sorry. But if you only listen to conservative news channels and you never listen to any other people talking any other way than what you already believe in, then that is selective exposure. You're only exposing yourself to things that you feel like that you already believe. And if you only listen to liberal news stations like CNN and you never listen to any other kind, then again, selective exposure. You're only exposing yourself to those things that already agree with what you already think. And so you're not putting yourself in the position to have to deal with other things like that. One of the biggest ways that cults do that is they isolate people. Now, sometimes they go to the extreme of isolating you and putting you in a compound. And if you're in a compound and the only other people in that compound believe exactly the same way you do, and you're not allowed to interact with outsiders, you're not allowed to call people on the phone who don't believe the same way you do, you're also not allowed to watch TV, you don't have access to radio, you don't have access to the internet, what do you have? You're in an echo chamber because all you're doing is echoing each other. And you have no way of knowing any other way to think. And we probably don't realize it, how much we depend on that. We are always kind of noticing how other people react. For instance, if you're somewhere and all of a sudden a bunch of people look to the right and up, you're going to look to the right and up because you want to see what are they looking at? You know, that's just automatic. That's a survival mechanism. Because if there's something up in the sky to the right that's dangerous and everybody else is looking at it and you're ignoring it, you might be the only one that thing hurts. So you need to know what they're looking at. And that is part of being a social animal. And we are social animals. And if we would have lived somewhere back a long time ago, or even very rarely, but nowadays too, in a hunter-gatherer society, and if they would kick us out and they would not allow us to be part of it anymore, we would die. Because we depend on the group for our survival. And that is a big part of why we are the way we are. And that is a big part of why we are so susceptible to the techniques and the things that these cults use to control people. If we were not social animals, it wouldn't work because we wouldn't care. We wouldn't care at all. But we are social animals. And to give you an example, if say somebody gave me a birthday party and we had dinner and we ate birthday cake and, you know, we had a good time, and then it was time for me to open my presents. If I opened a box and got something out of a box and I had absolutely no idea what it was, just literally never seen anything like that before in my entire life, I would be looking at it and thinking like, what is this? And then I would look around the room and say there are 10 other people in the room. If all the other people in the room were like, oh, you know, they were all excited for me that I got this thing, I still wouldn't know what it was, but I would know that it was something good and that it was something to get excited about. And then I would like, oh, what is this? I never had one before, you know. But if I took the thing out of the box and everybody else in the room was like, I was like, what is this? Some kind of poison snake that I've never seen before? I mean, like, what is this bad thing? I would obviously be able to know from the facial expressions of all the people around me if it was something good or something bad. And that's how we are. And we're that way so much, and we've been that way right from the beginning, that we don't even realize how much we really are that way. And so when you isolate people from everyone except those who react the exact same way they do, then you're depriving them of a whole bunch of the way that we gauge things. We don't get everything from inside our own heads. As much as we want to believe we do, we don't. We use a lot of social cues. And the fact is that it's really dangerous to be somewhere where the only people you're around are people that are just like you. That isn't a good place to be at all. And most cults don't put people in compounds. I was never in a compound, I'm very happy to say. But they don't want you to watch, like in the cult I was in, they didn't want us to watch TV. We didn't have a TV. Although I did watch TV when I was at my mom and dad's house, because they weren't in the cult. And then I didn't know this, but in some of the message churches, you weren't supposed to have a radio, which I listened to the radio a lot when I was in the cult. But I didn't know some people said you weren't supposed to listen to the radio or read newspapers, which I read newspapers, but you weren't supposed to. And back then there was no such thing as the internet. And that was just starting when I left the cult. Well, I don't know if it was just starting. It was just starting for almost everybody to have it in their homes, because I left in 2004. And people were talking about these really terrible things that were on the internet, like solitaire, because we're not supposed to play cards, and yet people were tempted to play solitaire on the computer, and they were giving each other advice how to remove the solitaire so you won't have this really evil thing tempting you. So I didn't hear anybody talking about online porn back then. I'm assuming it was a thing, but if it was, nobody was talking about it. But they were talking about solitaire, which I think is pretty funny. But so we were very isolated, even though we did not live in a compound. And so the isolation is so important because, again, like I said, we use social cues to figure out what to think, what to feel, how to react. And when you don't have a variety of social cues, when you're basically in an echo chamber, they're depriving you of that. And they're doing that on purpose. That is no coincidence. Another thing that is, so there are quite a few thought-stopping techniques. And thought-stopping techniques are something that we do to ourselves and to each other. And one of the most effective thought-stopping techniques we had in our cult was called putting it on a shelf. And this is not unique just to the end time message and to William Branham. I know that this is a thing in the Mormon church, and I don't know how many other churches, but there's a thing called putting it on the shelf. So if William Branham said something that I didn't understand or that made no sense to me whatsoever, like for instance that women are lower than hogs and dogs, then instead of thinking about it and worrying about it and actually trying to figure it out, I would put it on my shelf. And what that is like, it's like a shelf in your closet, and whenever there's something he says or the Bible says or any like person that you think is godly says that you don't understand or you don't agree with or it doesn't even make sense, instead of trying to analyze it and figure it out and think about it, see, that's what they don't want you to do. They don't want you to think. If they could turn on, if you had a button on your back that would make you never have critical thought again, they would mash that button. Believe me, they would, because that's the enemy. Critical thinking is the enemy of a cult. So they don't want you to think about this stuff because obviously it doesn't make any sense. And if you think about it long enough, you might figure out, hey, they don't know what they're talking about. So, but instead they tell you to put it on the shelf. And what that's like is like every time you run into something like that, you stick it in a box, then you put it on the shelf in the back of your closet, and you just ask God to show you what it means. Because obviously, if you think it's wrong, you don't know what it means. Because God's prophet said it, and if God's prophet said it, that means that God said it. And if you're thinking that God is wrong, well, who's the one that's wrong? The person is wrong. I'm the one that's wrong. God obviously isn't wrong. And what God said through his prophet obviously isn't wrong. So I'm wrong. But rather than trying to figure all that out, I just put it on my shelf and kind of forget about it. So I joke around that I left the cult when the shelf had like 20 million tons of stuff on it and it fell off the wall and hit me in the head. And that's what got me out of the cult, but that's just kind of a joke. But we all had so much stuff on our shelves that we were purposely not thinking about, and that is very convenient for them now, isn't it? Because that's what they don't want you to do. They don't want you to think about it. And there's a man named Robert Lifton. He wrote a very interesting book about thought reform, and he talked about thought-stopping cliches. And in a religious context, and thought-stopping cliches are just statements, often very simple, and we've all heard these before. But they're a way to make somebody stop thinking about something and or stop talking about it. So, for instance, if you're talking about something and then the person you're talking to says, "Well, everything happens for a reason," what's this, like, the subcontext of that statement? I mean, we know what the literal meaning of the words are, but what's the subcontext? Like, well, everything happens. I mean, there's nothing that can happen that doesn't happen for a reason, so why don't you just stop worrying about it and thinking about it and just drop it? Don't think about it anymore. There's a reason. You don't know what it is, but don't worry about it anymore. Another one is, well, don't judge. So, like, if I see the pastor of my church doing something immoral, then I would tell, well, I can't judge the pastor. He's a man of God. So rather than trust my own 2 eyes and my 5 senses and my brain telling me what he did was wrong, then I just tell myself, well, I can't judge him. And then that makes me not think that anymore. Or if I say it to another person, if I say, you know what I saw? And instead of them confirming maybe they saw the same thing, or instead of them at least confirming that that's a valid thing to be concerned about, they'll be like, well, don't judge. You know, like that they're telling you, don't think about that. Again, every single one of these is a thought-stopping technique, and the underlying meaning of every single one of these is don't think. Just don't think, period. Another one is, well, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Which, you know, a lot of these are actually true. But the way they're being used is they're being used like a hammer on your top of your head. Like, stop thinking. Stop thinking about the fact that your kid died. Stop thinking about the fact that a tornado came and tore your house down. The Lord gave you the kid. The Lord gave you the house. Now the Lord took it away. You know, blessed be the name of the Lord is the rest of that statement. Though, another one is let go and let God. Okay, let go and let God. So in other words, don't think about it. Don't have any feelings about it. Just let go and let God. Just say, here, God, it belongs to you. Well, what do you do about the fact that this guy who claims to be God's prophet and claims that what he says is God talking is where the thing supposedly came from, God, which it didn't come from God, obviously. God does not think that women are lower than hogs and dogs. But people will say that, or will say it even to ourselves just to make the thoughts stop and the words stop. They don't want to hear it. Or God works in mysterious ways. Or only God can judge. You don't have the right to judge. Well, guess what? I do have the right to judge. If I see somebody committing a crime, or if I see somebody doing something immoral to someone, especially a child or another kind of helpless person, not only do I need to judge it, I need to interfere with it, and I need to try to make it stop. Yeah, I will do that. If I can possibly make it stop, I will do that. The other one is, well, it is what it is. God has a plan. Everything happens for a reason. Why do people say this stuff? I think some people are actually misguided enough to believe that this stuff helps people. Well, it doesn't help anybody. It's a way to invalidate people. It's a way to dismiss people. And it's a way to shut people down. And we even do it to ourselves. That's the sad thing. We even do it to ourselves. And I want to talk about just some of the mind control techniques that cults do use to cause people to not be allowed to think or feel what they think and feel. And this is something that they have down to a science. And there's quite a few of them. I'm going to list some of the main ones. One of them is gaslighting. They will gaslight you. They will get you to believe, to distrust yourself, your thoughts, what you've seen with your own two eyes and heard with your own two ears, what you know, and they will get you to the point through their horrible gaslighting things of getting you to the point where you don't trust yourself and you trust them over your own self. It can get to the point that if you go outside and you say the sky is blue, and then the cult leader says, oh no, the sky is purple with pink polka dots, you're going to actually believe the sky is purple with pink polka dots instead of believing it's blue, even though another part of you knows that it's blue and you looked outside and it was blue. That's how bad it can be. And so it's just ridiculous. So again, we were talking about isolation. That is their biggest tool and their most effective tool. If they can isolate you from everyone else, then they've got you. They can control you. And they instill phobias and they instill paranoia. Paranoia about the end of the world. They get you convinced that if you leave their group, that the only people that are going to survive the end of the world is your group. Your group might only have 10 people in it. Or it might have 1 million. 1 million out of 8 billion people that are on the whole planet. That's still not a lot. But no matter how many or how few people in your group there are, they will get you to believe that paranoia, this paranoid idea that if you leave the group, you will not survive the end of the world, which is just about to happen any second, like it has been for the last 2,000 years plus. People in Jesus's day, the disciples and Paul, they thought the world was going to end in their lifetime. And people have thought that ever since then. And every time in history have so many bad things happen in them that people point to that and they say this means the end of the world. That was happening 1,000 years ago. It was happening 2,000 years ago. It was happening 2 years ago. It was happening 2 seconds ago. And it's happening right now. People believe the world is ending very, very, very soon. And they always have believed that. And so far, they've been wrong. I'm not saying it will never end, but there's nothing pointing to the idea that it's ending anytime right now. And I know a lot of people will consider that practically heresy, because that is a very common belief that gets pounded in people's heads all the time. But there's nothing pointing to that. Nothing in the Bible. I don't know. I'm not going to go off into that tangent. The other thing is they will instill phobias. Phobia of what will happen to you if you leave the group. I mean, if you take things in a natural progression, if you are in a cult that follows a prophet, and then you realize that that prophet is wrong about some very fundamental, important things, the natural result of that is that you're going to leave the cult. You're not going to be part of it anymore. And then what happens then? You're going to die, according to them. You're going to get cancer, according to them. Or if none of those things happen to you, you will never be happy. You will never have a good life. And when you die, you go to hell. So, I mean, that's really scary. It's scary to leave a cult because they've got you so brainwashed that these awful things will happen to you if you leave. And the only way you can avoid those terrible things is to stay. That's why you don't allow yourself to go to the natural progression, because you can't bear the thought of putting yourself in a position where you would really need to leave. And you don't ever want to leave because you're terrified to leave. So you won't allow yourself to go down that road. And that is the way that they control you. They love bomb you. And love bombing means that they act like you're the greatest thing in the world. You're the most handsome, the most beautiful, the most wonderful, the smartest, the funniest. You're just great. You're so great. They're so happy you're there. It's like the best thing that ever happened to them is that you walk through the door of that church. And they will shower you with attention, invitations to get together, to hang out. They want to be your best friend. And if you think about it, a lot of people need that. Not to that degree, but a lot of people that end up in cults have not had a normal amount of love and a normal amount of friendship. And if you're deprived of those things, if you're living your life and if you say you've lived for the last 30 years and you haven't had good relationships and you've never been married or had a girlfriend or a boyfriend that you've had a good relationship with, say you didn't have a good relationship with your parents, and you walk into this place and they love bomb you, I mean, that's like giving food to a starving person or giving water to a person that's almost about to die of dehydration. Of course you're going to want that. You want more of it. You want more and more and more of it. So that is a super effective way to control people and to get them to join the cult. So they do these. There's another thing they do that is a thought-stopping technique. That's not exactly like the thought-stopping cliches, but these thought-stopping techniques actually hijack the brain. And they get you into an altered state of consciousness, almost similar to a light hypnotic trance. And there's two things really dangerous about that. One of them is because it just hijacks your mind from what you were thinking about. You can't do these things and be thinking, I don't agree with that preacher saying that women are lower than hogs and dogs at the same time. That's just not physically possible. And the other thing is that when you get into that light, that altered state of consciousness, you can be very suggestible, which is what they say, which is what hypnosis does. You can become very suggestible with that. And what those things are is chanting, swaying, and you say, well, I've never chanted. Well, have you been in a church that sang the same chorus 10 times in a row? Singing something repetitiously is chanting. That's like the definition of it. And then the other one is speaking in tongues. And, as far as swaying goes, that is the thing. If you sway long enough, it's similar to dancing. And have you noticed, I don't know, we've all studied history. We've probably all watched documentaries about all the ways different people live, different indigenous people all over the world, people that haven't had much contact with Western technology. They all have their ceremonies. And what do they involve? Chanting, singing, and dancing. Often for hours and hours on end. Why do they do that? Because they know that it will get them into an altered state of consciousness. That is why people do that. And if you go to church, I read something just recently about somebody that was a church service, and they repeated the same phrase for 20 minutes. That will put you, they were calling it a trance, and it is like a trance. That messes with your head. And even if you were chanting, like, what if you're chanting something really from the Bible? Like, I love Jesus for 20 minutes. Would that be bad? Would that be wrong? Or Jesus loves us. Would that be bad? Would that be wrong? Not necessarily, but if you're doing that and then you sit down and you listen to a sermon after they've had you do this for 20 minutes and gotten you to this altered state of consciousness in which you were very suggestible, what does that say? That makes you very vulnerable to the things that they have to say. It's like opening a trap door in your mind where things can go in it. And if the stuff they're saying is true and it's all benign and it's all good, that's one thing. But what if they're saying things like women are lower than hogs and dogs? What if we had chanted the same phrase for 20 minutes before I heard that? Would it have had a different effect on me? I don't know. I think it would. Maybe I would even start believing it. I don't know. But the fact remains is that those things are dangerous. And a lot of people object to that. They think that's the way the Bible says that you're supposed to worship God. And I'm not going to at all talk about whether or not, for one, you don't have to worship God in a group setting. If I wanted to chant and if I wanted to sing the same phrase for 20 minutes, I'd be much more comfortable doing it alone in my living room and worshiping God that way than I would be to be in a group setting where they could start messing with my head. Because after being in the cult for 28 years, I don't want anybody messing with my head. That's just That's not something I'm open to anymore. I've had enough of that as it is. And so I didn't really have many feelings about that. I don't remember ever agreeing with anything he said about women, but I also don't remember rejecting it. I think, for one thing, I did put it on a shelf. And once it's on the shelf, we're actually really good at not even thinking about it anymore. And so that's one reason why I probably can't remember how I felt or what I think. I think I can't remember how I felt because I don't think I have many feelings about it. I didn't allow myself to feel angry the way I do now about it because he was God's prophet. And so I can't get mad at him for saying the stuff he says, no matter what he says. But now I am. I'm really angry right now about that. It is infuriating that all over the world, millions of women are sitting there hearing that garbage poured into their ears. And it's even worse to think of all the little girls that sat there and heard that stuff. And they thought that stuff about themselves. And it's just disgusting. And again, like I was saying earlier, we are social animals. And all the things that we have the ways our minds have adapted to fit into a social group, which is what we have to do for our own survival, is what makes us susceptible to these mind control techniques. And I'm going to leave some links in the video to Leo Fessinger's books, When Prophecy Fails and A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance. I'm also going to leave a book called by Steve Hassan, who is the leading cult expert in this country, called Freedom from Cult Mind Control. And I'm also going to leave a link from Robert Lifton, who was one of the first people that studied this in a systematic way. And he was the one who came up with the idea of thought-stopping cliches. And he wrote an amazing book about thought reform in China. And he interviewed and studied people that had been through the thought reform program that they had in communist China back in, I think it was the 50s. And after some of them managed to leave China, and he was able to interview those people and find out exactly what they did to them to change the way they thought, because it's very effective, unfortunately. And he wrote a groundbreaking book, and he broke it down to 8 techniques that they use. And of the 8, when I read the 8 of them, 6 of them definitely were practiced by the cult I was in. And you know what's really interesting? They didn't read that book. You know they didn't read that book. They didn't read any book about how to do this. How do these guys all know how to do it? They do it effectively, and they do it the same way. Do they learn from each other? That's kind of what I think. It's like, is there some kind of correspondence school, or nowadays some site on the dark web you can go to actually learn how to become a cult leader? I don't know. I don't know if it's trial and error and they just do what works. I'm really curious about that, because if you take every cult, like some cults don't allow sex. They enforce celibacy. And some cults force people to have sex just indiscriminately with everyone. Like everybody has sex with everybody. Some cults don't even have a god, like Scientology. They don't have a god. If you call anything their God, it would be L. Ron Hubbard, but he's not really, they don't consider him God. And some cults are all about God. Some cults are very primitive. Some cults are very modern. Some cults are more Catholic. Some are more Protestant. Some are Eastern. Some are Western. And then you have a whole other group of cults that have nothing to do with religion. They're about psychology. They're about politics. They're about multi-level marketing. Anything can become a cult. Anything. But if you strip away all the superficial differences, they all operate exactly the same way. And that is really kind of mind-blowing. When I realized that, I was very surprised. So that is why it is pretty much impossible for me to tell you how I felt when he said that, because I really didn't feel much at all. I have heard other people say that they felt a lot of shame, and I just think that's so heartbreaking. And there's another reason why I have a hard time telling you how I felt about this, and that is because of dissociation. Dissociation is a defensive technique mechanism that our mind does. And just kind of recently, talking to my psychiatrist, he says that he believes I was pretty dissociated during the entire 22 years of my marriage. So that was most of the time I was in the cult. I was also married. And when you're dissociated, you're not feeling, and you're not reacting in a normal way. And it's, I want to learn more about that, and I do want to make a video about that because it's very interesting. You can live your life, you can go to work every day, you can have conversations with people, you can have a kid, you can raise your kid, you can do all the stuff that people normally do and a bunch of other stuff too, and yet be disassociated. It's not like you're in a catatonic state. You're living your life, you're functioning, but at what level? I think at a very low level. And so that was what was going on with me during that time. So I really appreciate you guys listening to this video. I would love it if you would give it a thumbs up. That really helps me, and I would love it if you would subscribe to this channel, and I would especially love it if you would leave a comment. I really want to turn this in from a monologue to a dialogue. I appreciate so much everyone who watches my video and finds out what I think, but I want to know what you guys think. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.